Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the visit of External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj to Bangladesh. This was the minister's first standalone visit to any foreign country. Earlier she had accompanied the Prime Minister on his maiden foreign visit to Bhutan. In the context of Mrs. Swaraj's visit to Dhaka, today we are going to discuss some of the outstanding issues in the India-Bangladesh relationship. These issues range from sharing of transboundary river waters, rationalizing and demarcating the boundary, trade, border management, and issues relating to each other's security. We will see whether the minister has provided any new clues to how these issues will be tackled by her government. To discuss these issues, we have with us three eminent diplomats. Ambassador Veena Sikri was High Commissioner to Bangladesh. She was followed by my friend Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti as High Commissioner to Dhaka, and he was followed by our third guest, Ambassador Rajit Mittar, as High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Sikri, let me begin with you. What were the apprehensions of the Bangladesh government about the new government in Delhi, and do you think Sushma Swaraj's visit has allayed Bangladeshi fears?
I think definitely yes. First of all, I think that what has happened with India's neighbours in the last 1 month of the Narendra Modi government is perhaps more than 2 terms of the UPA. You've had the swearing in where the PMs of neighbouring countries came, you've had Prime Minister's visit to Bhutan, and now this visit to Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh has been expecting for the last 2.5 years after Dr. Manmohan Singh's visit September 2011, action on the LBA, ratification in the parliament, and of course movement on TISA. This didn't happen.
No, what were their fears? This is their expectation.
Yeah, expectation was this. They were disappointed. In the run-up to the elections, I think there was a lot of negative propaganda coming in the Bangladesh media, similar to that coming in Pakistan media, similar to that coming in the external media, basically based on what the Congress government was saying. And of course, some of the statements regarding illegal immigration and so on, which had created a lot of furor in the Bangladesh media. But immediately after the swearing in of the government, after the visit of Bangladesh Speaker Shireen Sharmin Chaudhary, you saw a complete change. You saw the bilateral talks at that time, you saw the follow-up, and now a very sincere commitment to actual implementation. This is what has taken the Bangladesh media very pleasantly by surprise, and they are fully committed to now making this work.
All right. Pinak, the negative propaganda actually emanated from the BJP, which said that we will repatriate all the illegal immigrants. Okay, so that was the fear in Bangladeshi mind, that these people will come into power, they'll start sending them back. Now, but what do you make of the Bangladesh Foreign Minister A.H. Mahmood Ali claiming in an interview that the issue of illegal immigrants did not even figure in any of the official discussions? So is illegal immigration from Bangladesh merely an election issue in India, or is it really an issue between these two countries? Or do you think Dhaka was being too clever by half, because after all, Sushma Swaraj in her address to a think tank did mention of the need to set up a legal and administrative regime to check illegal immigration?
I'm not at all surprised by what he said, because Bangladesh's standing policy has been to deny that there is any illegal migration. I mean, this is something I've always found rather implausible and also very difficult to understand. This sort of, head in the sand, ostrich-like policy.
No, but to say that no discussion took place?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that is. I mean, as I said, it is part of their policy to deny that this exists, and hence no discussion can take place. But this is a problem that I think we have faced with Bangladesh for a very long time. It is simply denial that there is illegal migration. And that is also creates a problem in the sense that how do you solve it? Because if I deny that there is no, then I have nothing to discuss with you. So this is a problem, and I think we have to deal with this. And I would expect a reasonably, wise Bangladeshi government to understand that this is a problem in India, in domestic politics, as we have seen during the campaign. Okay,
Ambassador Mittar, they often say that the bedrock of a relationship between two nations is really the nature of the relationship between its two peoples. Therefore, the issue of illegal immigration, if it hurts Indian states in the northeast. But let's talk about the visa regime, okay? Don't you think the visa regime should be eased for all Bangladeshis, not only for those under 13 and above 65, and those who want to come and work in this country, you can have work permits for them?
I think the visa regime is already fairly liberal.
Very difficult to get an Indian visa. It's a torturous process.
Every year,
I know things have improved.
over half a million. Every year, over 500,000 Bangladeshis visit India. These include tourists, medical tourism, students, businessmen.
Multiple entry visas are very difficult for people.
Multiple entry visas are now being offered for people under 13 and over 65. This is the first step in
Why not offer it to everyone? Everyone who's eligible should be given a multiple entry visa.
Well, we can go step by step and see, because there is also a problem of certain numbers of Bangladeshis overstaying here, which the Home Ministry has some data on that. So more consultation and more sort of administrative work is required on this. But I think it's still a very generous visa regime, and one cannot say that...
Not as generous as we are with Bhutan and Nepal. So if we can allow free entry of Nepalese to India and Bhutanese to India, why not Bangladesh? Or do you think it's got to do with religion?
No, I don't think it's got anything to do with the religion. I think there is the history, as Pinak mentioned, of illegal migration into India, which is an issue that has to be addressed sooner or later.
Okay, so what comes in the way of a free movement of people between our two countries?
Let me tell you that illegal immigration from Bangladesh has been the elephant in the room for 40 years. And actually, because the two governments do not discuss it bilaterally, it's discussed in political rallies or in the media, and it becomes a politicized issue. In 1992, when Khaleda Zia was Prime Minister in Bangladesh and Narasimha Rao, Congress government in India, in the joint statement, we actually accepted for the first time that yes, there is a problem, let's discuss it and solve it. But then after that, both governments got cold feet and did not talk about it.
I understand, for example, that migration is politics in the northeastern states of India. You know, people migrate. They change the tribal population of that state completely. You know, we've seen this happen in Mizoram with Chakmas. We've seen it happen all over eastern Himalayas. Yes. I think it's a problem also with Nepalese. Okay, but we're not discussing that today. But if that's an issue, why don't we not only recognize it, but regulate it?
But that's the point. You have to regulate through discussion. When both sides refuse to bring it into a bilateral discussion, then you can't regulate it because you're pretending it doesn't exist. Even the story of the IMDT Act and the Supreme Court's verdict and the Assam government's, what the central government did so that itself shows that we are not willing to recognize the elephant in the room. Today, I think that through External Affairs Minister's visit, it has been brought on the table. And my feedback has been from Bangladesh that they are prepared now. They're themselves talking about work permits. They're talking about special regimes. So they're willing to accept it. It's a good time to move ahead on that.
The foreign minister's interview, Bangladesh foreign minister's interview, doesn't indicate that to me.
No.
So if it's happening privately, very good, but it's not in the public domain.
You see, when the Joint Commission takes place, the foreign minister will be coming to India, and we should tell them at that time we want this in the Joint Commission issue. The Joint Commission is meant to discuss the whole gamut. Say we want to include it, and then from there on, it'll be there.
All right, we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the nature of India-Bangladesh relationship. Pinak, let's take the case of transboundary sharing of water, the Teesta Accord in particular. Mrs. Swaraj has apparently promised that she will develop a national consensus on the Teesta Accord. Now, the disagreement is purely internal to India. There's no objection from the Bangladeshi side. In fact, the water commissioners of two sides have no differences. Independent experts have no differences. So how do you think that the intransigent Chief Minister of West Bengal can be brought on board? Because technically there is no issue. What is happening de facto is sought to be legalized through the agreement.
Well, as you said, it's a matter of domestic politics. It's a matter of relations between the center and the state. Water is a state subject, and hence the state has to be brought on board. Hence, I would say that we have this aspect of center-state consultations on foreign policy is a long neglected area. Because while we have some mechanisms like the Northeast Council and the State Council, etc., but never ever these things are discussed. It is left to the last moment, and then finally when the state does not agree, then you are stuck. There is no doubt that the state government has to be consulted, and there is no question of using words like intransigent or things like that, because it is a matter of the state's perception about how much water is to be given. And while the water commissioners may agree, of course, I don't deny that there is politics in it. I mean, what does the state want in return? You have to see what is the quid pro quo. Okay, and that is where
so she'll have to be given a special package.
Whatever. I'm not saying what to.
Master Mitter, do you think that the issue is not merely between West Bengal and how much water West Bengal can give, but the issue is also between Sikkim and West Bengal? There's no water sharing agreement between Sikkim and West Bengal. So don't you think Sikkim also needs to be brought in?
There are some power projects on the Tista in Sikkim.
Hundreds.
But they are mostly run-of-the-river projects, so there's no storage of water. But certainly, consultation on the Tista agreement is required both with West Bengal and with Sikkim. And as Pinak mentioned, it is a state subject which needs to be for a consensus to emerge on this. And I think with the effort that the new government is promising, I'm sure this can be reached.
So you need a consensus between Sikkim and West Bengal in the center before we can come to an agreement
Yes,
with Bangladesh. Ambassador Sikri, do you think that the Tista agreement, as and when it happens, it's an interim agreement of course, can be a model agreement for all the other 50 odd rivers that the two countries share? Or do you think each river comes with its own peculiarities and its own history of waterworks and so on and so forth?
No, it can be a template, there's no doubt about it, because I think as we go ahead, both India and Bangladesh know how these agreements are coming out. And I want to draw one point about concluding the Tista, that when the Ganga Waters Treaty was concluded, the only one so far, it was Chief Minister Jyoti Basu who led the negotiations. And that's how it was concluded, because he knew what he could get his state people to accept. This time also, some primacy in the negotiation has to be given to the state government, even though, of course, water is a state subject, and even though the center has a responsibility. Yeah. That is number one. And number two, as we do it, once Mamata Banerjee does it, the other states will also look at the same time, the Feni River and others. The template becomes clearer and clearer. Okay. The main point, I think, in the Tista is that there is no idea on both sides how much water there is in the river.
That's why it's an interim agreement.
What we think and what they think are two different rivers.
It's an interim agreement where you say you'll collect data. But let me ask you this, Pinak. Don't the people of West Bengal also need to be educated? I mean, why are water flow and water sharing data, why is that data secretive? I mean, it takes you a lot of research to figure out that water is actually divided at Ghazaldoba Barrage, 75% to India, 25% to Bangladesh, and the rest 25% they get through recharge in the 120 kilometers to Dalia Barrage, and it becomes 50-50. Now, if you explain it to people, maybe they will put pressure on politicians and say, what's wrong? India is getting all the water it needs.
Well, I think you are right. Public education is lacking. People do not understand how these water...
And political education is lacking about technical matters.
So people hang on to things like, they are taking away our water. I mean, that happens on both sides. Yeah. So India is denying water. In Bangladesh, for example, you constantly hear India is taking away water. India is denying water. So that becomes a public perception. Right. Then it becomes very difficult to navigate, that kind of a perception and explain to people, which requires effort. Public education requires
information.
And
information. So you have to part with information and become transparent.
You have to have some public education program to tell them that what the government is doing on both sides, I would say, is a good thing.
All right. Master Mitter, the land boundary agreement where you signed, I don't know, thousands of maps, it was agreed in 2011, brought to Parliament 2 years later. And the BJP, along with the AGP and the Congress and the Trinamool, opposed it tooth and nail. Now, before we come to why the BJP is supporting it now, what does the land boundary agreement entail? What makes it so difficult?
It's not difficult, but it's extremely important because these are problems actually left over from 1947, and this has been pending for so many years. There are three components to it. There was a small section of 6.1 kilometers undemarcated border. There are the adverse possessions, and there are the enclaves. Now, all these were tackled in a comprehensive manner. Certainly the enclaves, as we all know, is an anomaly which has to be corrected, and
that people is living Indian territory inside Bangladesh, Bangladeshi enclaves inside India.
In India.
And then there are second order and third order enclaves.
And people living there virtually have no government because they are cut off from the...
No services.
No government services. Yeah. The important point is the adverse possessions, because those were the most difficult to settle. This is little pockets of territory which, even though the border runs in a particular line, are being occupied by the other side. And in settling this border, this adverse possessions, a very pragmatic sort of approach was adopted, where you take into account ground realities, who's living where, who's cultivating the land. And so there was give and take on both sides in a very comprehensive manner. That becomes very urgent to settle as soon as possible because the ground reality may change over time, Then there may be further encroachments and things like that. So all said and done, this is a very important agreement which I think needs to be settled as soon as possible.
And now is the right time.
And now is the right time with the government determined to forge the consensus because it requires a constitutional amendment.
Basi Sikri, this requires a constitutional amendment. The BJP opposed it earlier. Yes, the BJP today has an overwhelming majority, doesn't have two-thirds majority. So what makes anybody confident that the land boundary agreement can now be not only signed but ratified through a constitutional amendment?
I think that was the view in September 2011 when Dr. Manmohan Singh went to Bangladesh and signed it. And it was the view that if it had been brought to Parliament within the next 6 months after that, it would have gone through because it was such a goodwill gesture.
No, but will it go through now?
I think now, similarly, by consulting the opposition, bringing all the people together, have an all-party meeting, explain the situation, explain the importance of the India-Bangladesh relation, explain all the other good things that are going to happen, and how the expectation of the people of Bangladesh that Indian government will keep its word. And I'm sure that all the parliamentarians would accept, because Congress party cannot say no to it. They would not. A number of the other Congress allies would also not be able to say no to it because they were earlier in the group which was saying yes to it. So I think that it's quite easy to get a two-thirds majority on the LBA. If it needs a little bit of work, it needs a few meetings, it needs a lot of public education, because the importance of not having a agreed border with Bangladesh and the illegal activities that result from this. The whole illegal migration comes because of all this border being, wherever there's adverse possession, people living off a different side, it becomes an area for illegal activity.
So it can be done now?
I think it definitely can be done. It needs a commitment and consistent effort.
All right. On that hopeful note, we need to take a break again. I'll be back in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the state of India-Bangladesh relations. Pinak, on the question of trade, India has promised to move beyond quota-free and duty-free regime. Now, what does it mean? Because you have unlimited imports of textiles and you have only 25 items that are not duty-free, and those are items like alcohol, tobacco, etc. So what is it that can be done? Is it an infrastructural bottleneck that we're talking of?
No, you see, what has happened is that we have allowed zero duty entry of Bangladeshi products except for the 25 on the negative list. Now, what that has led to a surge in Bangladesh's exports to India, crossing, I think,
but the balance is still adverse.
The balance will, I'm afraid, remain for a very long time because Bangladesh does not have the kind of products that they can export to India. And so I think that is going to remain unless Indian manufacturers set up industries in Bangladesh and start exporting from there to India and maybe to the northeastern states as well. That is why this issue of the special economic zones has come up, and that has been taken up during the visit of the EAM. And so special economic zones for manufacturing and re-export to or export to India is going to address that balance. But otherwise the balance is going to remain because of the size of the
go up
economies.
the moment you have trade through rivers, rail, road. Would it not? So infrastructure is important, isn't it?
It would certainly reduce the transactional cost because waterway trade is the cheapest mode. And the railways, for example, has been languishing. We had an extensive network of railway connectivity. If that is kind of reconnected, and it's possible, Indian Railways and Bangladeshi Railways can work together and do it. There is a line of credit and all those things are there. So connectivity will certainly reduce cost of trade and will help trade in many ways.
Ambassador Mittal, during her visit, Mrs. Swaraj also said, she referred to the need for building an energy corridor between India and Bangladesh, and she referred to the 500 megawatts that are going through the Behramara power interconnection. She also said that another 100 megawatt will go from Palatana. Now, can you have this energy corridor without coming to any agreement on the transboundary rivers on which dams are being built, where electricity will be generated? Or are they two separate issues?
I think they have to be handled separately. And in fact, on power, there has been a lot of progress between the two countries. One of the successes of the last few years, this linking of the electricity grids. Even the power secretaries met in April this year, and there is an in-principle agreement to look at a new power corridor from Assam into Bihar, from Rangia through Dinajpur in Bangladesh into Bihar, to evacuate up to 6,000 megawatts of power, of which Bangladesh draws a certain percentage which they need. Bangladesh is very short of power, and this is a sort of win-win cooperation for both countries because there's a lot of power potential in the northeast. I mean, we talk of figures like 50,000 megawatts of power potential in the northeast. all this can be evacuated more cheaper through Bangladesh, and also allow Bangladesh to draw a substantial amount of power for their own domestic use.
Okay.
So it's a win-win for both countries.
All right. Let me ask you something slightly linked but also different, which is sub-regional cooperation between India and Bangladesh on power, trade, connectivity, electricity, energy. They said more number of border huts, more land custom stations. Is that enough, or do you need to set up, not only energy corridor, a telecommunications corridor, diesel pipelines, gas pipelines, LNG highways they've been called?
Yeah.
And is that just a pipe dream? Because considering that Bangladesh doesn't allow India even transit to its northeastern states, and we are dreaming of LNG highways and diesel and energy corridors.
Yeah.
So is it realistic?
I think that, first of all, this infamous issue of transit should be brought squarely into the trade and border management issues. So far, it's looked at something separately. But actually, if you look at this transshipment or transit, it is through river, it is through rail. So I think let's look at what is plausible. First of all, river. Already under the $1 billion credit line, we've promised dredgers. On the way to being delivered, not yet done. Under the $1 billion credit line, we promised modernization of railways, not yet done. Akhora-Agartala rail link, not yet done. Now, when these things happen, and you actually have a modernized railway system in Bangladesh, and the water use goes up to 70% for transport, as it was before the siltation happened, then the whole issue of transit vanishes. And I think what you said about sub-regional cooperation is very important, because what we are trying to do bilaterally, it sometimes becomes politicized. But if you look at it in the context of BBIN, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal and India, which is Northeast India and West Bengal, then it becomes doable because other countries are benefiting. Bhutan and Nepal want corridors to use Mongla and Chittagong port, and I think you must bring in Myanmar, because when we talk about development of Northeast India, the next step is development of Myanmar, which is very similar.
Then
the West
BCIM, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar.
But I think that if we bring this in and do this sub-regionally, a lot of issues just melt away and don't remain issues anymore.
I hope they melt away. I hope they melt away. Pinak, what does better border management mean in concrete terms when people and animals can cross at several points? How does one prevent, in Bangladesh, the border management is seen really how to prevent killing by the BSF. You must have seen that famous or infamous picture of this young bride, her body hanging on the border fence, shot while crossing. Each killing, in a sense, sends the relationship into a tailspin. So what would border management mean? Does it mean training also the BSF, that don't just go and shoot people? Not everybody is a smuggler. I mean, there are people who live on both sides. They marry, they work on on each other's side and go back in the evenings.
I think border management is a very large issue. I mean, there is also something called, and it is linked to things like movement of people. So movement of people is regulated by a visa regime. So you have to look at everything together. We talked about work permits. If they are going to come in any way, why not have a system of work permits? I mean, this could be a question that can be addressed. So border management really means regulating, having channels for legal entry and exit. Because if there is no such facility, then people will come anyway. Because this is a border which is porous. It's a border which history has imposed on us. People have been moving in and out. The question now is, how do you manage the border? So basically it has to be managed apart from infrastructure, which is to facilitate trade, the integrated checkposts and things like that. Integrated checkposts are meant for both goods and people. So that has to be increased.
Yeah, but with certain amount of humaneness.
Certain amount of humaneness. Now BSF, for example, I mean, Bangladeshis have always said, why do they shoot? You have an armed border force sitting along the border. You cannot tell it not to shoot. Okay. And there will be times then, they are of course under instruction to be very, very careful. And of course there are solutions like using rubber bullets and stuff like that. But you cannot tell a border security force not to use weapons.
Okay. All right. We are running out of time. So one last question to all of you. And a quick 20-second answer, please. India keeps talking about growth of fundamentalism in Bangladesh, which is inimical to India. Anybody who goes to Bangladesh is quite surprised that actually it's a fairly tolerant society. Their nationalism is linguistic, cultural nationalism. It's not Islamic nationalism. So therefore, but for Jamaat-e-Islami and some marginal groups, is by and large a society that is not a fundamentalist society. So do we overstate this all the time, or do we do it to focus on these marginal groups which are dangerous?
No, I think, as you say, anybody who's been to Bangladesh realizes immediately that it's a very secular society, and Durga Puja is widely sort of celebrated over there. This Paila Baisak
Muslim ministers go and participate.
has become a major secular celebration over there. There are fringe elements, extremists, but I think their importance, in my opinion, is often overstated.
Okay, quickly, we are really running out of time.
I think by and large, there is a secular, the society is secular. I'm not saying they are not religious, but they can be both religious and secular.
Absolutely.
And I think, but one should not ignore the fundamentalist fringe.
Veena ji.
I think both the BNP and the Jamaat have been using religion to get votes, and they're using religion in an anti-Indian context. I think you saw this, you've seen it for a long time. It's not anything new, and I think we have to worry about
Parties
it.
in India also do that. That
Yes,
doesn't
yes.
make them anti-Muslim.
Yeah, no, but
And
the point
similarly, that
is-
doesn't make BNP anti-Indian.
Yes, but
or
the point
anti-Hindu.
is, if you go to Pakistan, also sometimes you may feel that people are very secular. But the undercurrent that this use of religion brings in has brought in a lot of worry for the people of Bangladesh. It's not our concern. I must tell you that the people of Bangladesh themselves are worried about this. The infiltration
Should it
of
be our
religious-
concern?
Sorry?
Should it be our concern also?
Well, of course, because if the people of Bangladesh are worried about it, why not? We should also worry because of the porous border, because that has become the conduit. And I think that we have to share this. Sheikh Hasina's government has done a lot against it, and we have to share her concern because she is reflecting the people's views. So we have to strengthen her hand.
Share
in
her
doing
concern,
this.
but not necessarily her political perspective. But we've run out of time. We've run out of time. I thank all of you for coming here and analyzing the situation. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another interesting issue. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching.